For more, let's bring in Brian Kalt. He's a professor of law at Michigan State University. Brian, welcome. You have written extensively about the 25th Amendment and specifically about Section 4. Explain to us how this amendment can be used to remove the president from office, and what are the limitations?
Well, it technically only sidelines the president, takes away his power. It never removes him from office. But the vice president and a majority of the cabinet can declare him unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office. And at that point, power transfers immediately to the vice president. But then there's, because he's not out of office, there is a process for the president to assert that he's just fine and to take power back. That process is stacked in his favor, but it takes a while, and the vice president is in charge in the meantime. So if it were invoked now, it would probably result in Vice President Pence being acting president for the rest of the term.
Well, if the House calls on Vice President Pence to invoke the 25th Amendment and declare President Trump, quote, unable to successfully discharge the duties of his office, what happens next? How does that work?
The president can come back and say, send a declaration that says no inability exists. And at that point, there's a 4-day period during which the vice president and cabinet can reassert that the president is unable to discharge his powers and duties. At that point, the vice president remains in charge. And if during that 4-day period they say he is unable, they reject his declaration, then it goes to Congress to resolve the dispute. And Congress would have 21 days to take a vote. If they take a vote sooner than that, they could send the president back. They need 2/3 in the House and 2/3 in the Senate to keep him out. But if there's 21 days for them to vote and there's only 8 days left in the term, then presumably they could also just run off the clock at that point.
And you kind of touched on it there. You've previously said the 25th Amendment is biased in favor of the president keeping power. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, there's sort of a two-level structure to it. So if the president is completely incapacitated, which is the main thing that they were worried about when they wrote the amendment, then he's not going to say that he's okay, and power transfers quickly to the vice president, and that's easy. But if and when the president says he's okay, that no inability exists, then the only way to keep him out for a long time, more than that 4 days plus the 21 days, is if the vice president and the cabinet and 2/3 of the House and 2/3 of the Senate all agree that he is unable. So it's hard to get those kind of numbers. That's more than you would need for impeachment. The advantage of Section 4, though, is that all takes time, and the vice president is in charge in the meantime. So it takes immediate effect, unlike impeachment, where the president's in power until and unless the Senate votes to convict, and the Senate doesn't do anything quickly. Section 4 would have that rapid effect, and the way that it's stacked in the president's favor wouldn't help him this late in the term.
So ultimately, this is a call for the vice president to make. Help us understand here, what is the point of Congress voting on a resolution for it?
Well, in ordinary circumstances, because the deck is stacked in the president's favor, the vice president and cabinet might be sort of unlikely or afraid to do something to take power away from the president if he's just going to win that vote in Congress and take it back. Because then whatever problem they were having with him before, he'd be back in power again. They'd have whatever problems they had before, plus he'd be angry about what they just did and maybe fire everybody. So they need to know before they go forward that Congress, that they have the votes in Congress. If there's significant Republican support, which I don't think there will be in the House, but if there were significant Republican support, that would tell them, go ahead, we'll back you up on this. So it's just communicating to the vice president and the cabinet that the votes are there in a situation like this where the president would contest the action.
And given the time frame here, Brian, give us some context. You've got 8 days left here of the Trump administration, right? January 20th is Inauguration Day. help us understand why this urgent push for the 25th Amendment first.
I think what's motivating the Democrats to call for this is just the sense that this is the only way, the 25th Amendment is the only way to immediately take that power away. Impeachment's too slow. It looks like the Senate won't be back in town to have a trial. And so if they're concerned about things that the president might do in those last 8 days, this is really the only mechanism for stopping him from pardoning everybody, stopping him from ordering the military to do things. If that's their concern, this is the only tool with the potential to solve that problem.
So White House sources say that the vice president will not invoke the 25th Amendment, and if that happens, the House will move forward with impeachment proceedings. Now, the last impeachment effort did last several months, so what could it potentially look like this time around?
I think what they would do, since they can't do it before the 20th, then there's no hurry, and they've talked about delaying things to give President Biden a chance to get some of his agenda through in the first 100 days. Then they would have the trial in a few months. And President Trump would almost certainly argue that the Senate doesn't have jurisdiction once he's gone. There's some precedent for them having a trial after someone's already gone. And it's a complicated argument, but the Senate would have to decide that first. Do they have jurisdiction? Then they would go forward with the trial, and it would take however long it takes. The Senate may or may not want to do what President-elect Biden suggested and sort of do trial part of the day and regular business the rest of the day. But it would be, whatever else they're doing, it would be disruptive to the agenda. So it would be time consuming. There's no question about that.
Time consuming, but it's an interesting development because the New York Times is reporting that Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell is said to be, quote unquote, pleased about the effort to impeach President Trump. So we'll see what those changing dynamics on Capitol Hill might be. But before we let you go, Professor, if you could remind us, what does President Trump stand to lose if he is, in fact, not only impeached, but also if a Senate trial moves forward and if the Senate does ultimately vote to convict him?
If the votes are there to convict, and the McConnell story suggests that there might be, there are two penalties in an impeachment conviction: removal and disqualification. If he's already gone, removal is off the table. Disqualification, if the Senate, after convicting him, they would vote separately to disqualify him from holding future office, that could prevent him from running for president in the future. And so if the Republicans are voting in sufficient numbers to convict, it would be for that reason. There's also people talking about taking away his pension and other post-presidential benefits, but it wouldn't have that effect. Under current law, those benefits are only denied to people who are removed from office through impeachment. So it wouldn't affect his benefits.
All right, a lot to sort through there. Law professor Brian Kalt of Michigan State University. Professor, thank you very much for your analysis. Very helpful.
Thank you.